So what is AJAX? Would someone give us kind of maybe their definition of what AJAX is before we dive into it? How would you describe AJAX, what it does? Maybe why we want to use it. Yeah. So JavaScript by nature is asynchronous. Jesse this morning mentioned several times, we had to add some data or some code into a callback function, which is really one of the great benefits of JavaScript. And I'm sure you're seeing this in your Angular applications, the other lessons that you've gone through. But yeah, that's a really great description. It's the idea that we can go grab data and it's not going to freeze up our application in the foreground. So another example Jesse had was, what if you want to go out and grab some data and maybe you want some sort of progress bar on your site for the client to see, or some sort of spinner or something. Gmail is a great example, right? So you don't ask Gmail to send you new data or new emails, right? If you're on Gmail, it just does it for you. So it's somewhat of an asynchronous process. Another example, a weather forecasting site. So even on the iPhone or whatever, if you're looking at the weather stuff, if it starts raining, if it changes, if the percentages chance of weather changes, your phone will update automatically. Can you guys think of any other applications or things you use in daily life that would maybe take advantage of this asynchronous nature?
Sometimes supports actually do it.
That's a great example, yeah. Yep.
Did you mention Google Docs? I mean, is that just a really blown-out version?
Yeah, I guess you consider that asynchronous. So if you have several folks that are editing a document at the same time, yeah, someone makes a change. Actually, in real time, you can see them making the change. So it probably goes to like a central server and then gets pushed out. Yeah, I think you could use that as an example. It's probably a little more advanced. So I don't know if Node, if you guys have used something, totally spacing on the framework. We use it with Node, like for chat applications and such. When you poll, you do polling. WebSockets, excuse me, yeah. So that's something we go over in Atlanta. So WebSockets. So this idea that you're always listening for changes. And if you make a change, it gets pushed to the server and gets distributed to the other Google Docs people. Or if you make a change, it gets pushed to the Google server, and then I know about it. So it's that two-way kind of open dialogue between the client and the server for sure. Any stock people in here? Follow the stock market? Is anyone following Apple today? It's just getting the crap beat out of it. Do I? Buying opportunity, folks. So similar to your sports example, stock tickers are real time, right? So when stuff changes. So that's a really good example as well. Even if you really want to get technical, so what happens if we go to like Amazon.com and I'm looking, or even Google for that matter, and I'm looking for a particular product and I start typing it in, what happens? Like when I just start... Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tries to anticipate maybe what you're going for. Does the page refresh when you get that information? So the results, is guessing. That part is updating, but the page stays static, which is a really good example of that asynchronous. So that input box is using JavaScript to, okay, he's typing in more letters. Let me see what may match the criteria. So that's something that could be considered asynchronous as well. So advantages. What are some advantages to using asynchronous JavaScript? Even if you're using Angular or something, what are some advantages that you guys have noticed? So with Rails, for example, every time we go to a new page, the entire thing refreshes, right? Even like the nav bar will refresh, that kind of thing. But with Angular and asynchronous JavaScript, what are some differences or some advantages? I like how I ask questions and then I just put the stuff on the board. It's very, pay no attention to the answers on the screen. Yeah, no, that's
But yeah,
fine.
they're kind of separated, so
Yeah,
you know, whatever needs to be kind of gone. The back end just happens, but front end wise, it just kind of stays the same. So it doesn't really affect, I guess, like the output experience that way as you would have. Say if everything's fresh all the time, it just like the magic is happening behind the curtain. So it's sort of
yeah, that's a huge reason I think. It's just the user experience is so much nicer. Like when the entire page doesn't refresh, just a portion of the page or something. It's just so slick, and the web nowadays, I feel like that's where we're going. It's just going to be all JavaScript all the time eventually. That's a great example. User experience. Uh, some of these bullet points that are listed. So AJAX is faster, so it allows easier and quicker interaction between the user and the website as pages are not reloaded for content to be displayed. So, we looked at CNN.com yesterday. That was a lot of information that we got from CNN servers, right? Just a lot of files, a lot of JavaScript, a lot of images. So, suffice it to say, if we want to update a portion of that page, it's going to be a lot easier just to update the pertinent data versus grabbing all of that stuff and letting our browser re-render it. So it's going to be a lot faster to update information. It's compact, so with AJAX, several application features can be handled using a single web page, so that's pretty cool. Maybe you have different portions of your web page going to different APIs. Maybe you have a stock ticker here, even sports. Maybe you have, the NBA scores here. Maybe you have like the weather, like a little weather widget or something. All sorts of cool variety of applications you can build. You can modularize it into smaller bits, which is really powerful. And then, like you mentioned, Armani, the back end is separated from the front end. So applications that use AJAX-heavy front ends mean developers don't have to work on both sides of the stack at the same time. So if you're working on a dev team, it's like, Schmitty, you do the front end stuff, I'll work on the back end component, and we know that with AJAX, we can seamlessly combine the two at the right time. So it allows you to, again, kind of separate the concerns there. Makes it really efficient if you're working on a team. Any other advantages you guys can think of? User experience is a huge one, I think. We talked about this yesterday in the context of a CDN. What does a CDN stand for?
Content delivery.
Yeah, you got that one yesterday, huh?
Well, I don't know.
No, that's good. Yeah, so I mentioned yesterday, so what would happen if we're, let's say that you're incorporating jQuery into your project, but you're using a CDN. And what happens if you go into an airplane or something and you try to work on your app? If you're using CDN for your jQuery, are you going to be able to work on your stuff? Yeah, because you're going to be dependent on Wi-Fi, may need to pay for Wi-Fi or something. So that would kind of be a negative. One of the positive things, I think, particularly with your Angular apps, and Angular is just, AJAX and jQuery on steroids. But if you notice, if you load up your Angular, or if you go to an Angular site and you load it up, you can turn off the Wi-Fi and you can still operate the site because all of that information has already been sent to the front end, and you can just update those portions appropriately. So I think that's a really cool, kind of in the same ballpark of the AJAX advantages. Disadvantages. So the back and refresh buttons are rendered useless. So what do we mean by that? Why would that be a disadvantage?
Does that kind of guess you essentially start over?
Yeah, so that may be an issue.
Back up a couple steps.
Yeah. Again, that's a really important, as we're developing, something to keep in mind. That's a really good point. Yeah, you'd have to start over. What about this JavaScript can be disabled? Does anyone incorporate that? Does anyone turn JavaScript off in their browsers or anything? Yeah, do you do that, Matt? You ever turn off your stuff?
Not hardly anymore.
I know. I feel like it's not.
Everything seems to be dependent on it more.
Yeah, I feel like maybe that's not quite as pertinent or quite as relevant, but that's absolutely something to consider for sure.
So there's a lot of accessibility concerns with that. There are people that need access to the internet and stuff on the internet that don't have a browser like our browsers that won't
Yeah.
So it certainly can be an issue for some. They're a small percentage, but I think an important percentage of our customer base.
Yeah.
That's something to think about. They might not be able to run the JavaScript. And a lot of the testing is now starting to support it, but for a long time, testing didn't support running all the JavaScript stuff too. So it made automated testing and regression testing really tough. So for a long time, we did progressive enhancement, where you wrote an application that worked without JavaScript, and then you enhanced the way that its usability by adding JavaScript stuff in.
Yeah.
But we're moving kind of away from that now. I don't think the need has changed. We're just kind of ignoring it now.
Yeah. I feel like older versions of like Internet Explorer, like back in the day, would always give you issues with JavaScript. By the way, quick quiz here. What is the most used or the most popular browser in the world? Would you guys say?
Right now,
Yeah, right now.
Mozilla.
Okay. Any other guesses?
Most popular still going.
The most widely used. What browser is in? Yeah, so it's IE. Why is that? Do any of you guys use IE? I don't really know anyone that
So
does.
many PCs out there.
Exactly.
It's not bad anymore, which is hard to say because you're used to it being bad, especially after 6. But like, it's not bad anymore. It's like, no, I want to hate you so bad, but I can't.
Yeah. I can't quit you.
I can't quit you.
Yeah, it's come a long way.
Chrome, but yeah.
So why? Yeah. So why is that the most popular website? I mean, I don't really know anyone that uses it. So why is it? I think the market share last time I checked it was maybe like 60-65%. That was maybe a year ago. I'm sure it's changed, but
I'm seeing that being Chrome now, but I'm not. Yeah, I think it has shifted. I was with you. I thought it was ID.
Yeah.
I think it shifted now.
because I checked on that even like early 2015. That seems pretty nice. Anyway, the point being, think of all the legacy like Fortune 500 companies, like even banks and stuff that just it's like an iceberg shifting for them to update any kind of technology. So if you go to those companies, they're still using like really old systems and stuff. So yeah, in the corporate world, most things are PC. I would imagine for sure, in my experience anyway. I just think that's really interesting. So you have to consider the UX even more. So we've already seen a couple of examples. So Tom mentioned this idea that if you back click, it's going to refresh the entire page. It's just something to consider. I think also this could be an advantage because the user experience would be so much cleaner and nicer if you do incorporate AJAX and Angular, other JavaScript frameworks. So, but in general, you're going to have to think a little bit more about, kind of planning out your application if you're going to use this asynchronous functionality, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so can you guys think of any other advantages or disadvantages before we move forward? So you guys have all covered Angular, right? So you've gone through it. Who enjoys Ruby and Rails over Angular?
Yeah, I like both.
No, both. You have to choose.
I like both.
So maybe half and half, right? Yeah, I really, really like Ruby on Rails. It's not that I don't like the other stuff, but I think for the rapid prototyping and getting up to speed, and particularly if you're learning a language and the logic, Ruby and Rails is so ideal for that. But yeah, I know that our students are pretty opinionated about it, like one way or the other. It's pretty interesting. So why are we learning this? So we're learning how to build APIs on the server side. You need to start learning how to consume your API on the client side. So I imagine if you guys have done the mean stack, you create a database and you both do post and put requests and get requests to consume it and to write to it, that kind of thing. So you create and consume your API, and this is one of the ways that we accomplish that. You guys have already, it's week 11, you guys have already done some advanced front-end framework deep dives. And you're always going to be touching APIs for sure. Did you guys use a gem called HTTP Party when you were going through your Ruby and Rails stuff? Yeah, that was a pretty fun gem. And the stuff we're going to do today is going to be somewhat similar to using that gem, but we're going to be using jQuery to do that. Cool. Any questions so far? All right, so let's, yeah.
Like, who came up with the idea of AJAX, and was it JavaScript was first introduced? Was it developed like soon after, or was it just something that somebody came up with and
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would have to check into that, but it comes to my mind. I don't think it was included in Brendan. I forget his last name, the gentleman that created JavaScript. I don't think it was initially included. Matt, I don't know if you have this idea that AJAX. I mean, well, first of all, AJAX is kind of more of a jQuery thing. That's what we're going to use. But that idea of the asynchronous nature of JavaScript, particularly to hit like a database or an API.
I know the technology was there for a long time before we started really using it.
Yeah.
It was there for years before Google Maps came out and showed us what we could do with it.
That's a really good point.
ignoring it. And that was, Google Maps was the flagship product that came out, and all of a sudden, oh my God, look what we can do. Let's start paying attention to this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly when it was introduced, but it was early on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a really good podcast. I'm totally spaced on the gentleman that initially wrote JavaScript, but he worked at Netscape at the time. And I listened to a really good podcast where he went through, he created it in 10 days. And it was very much, necessity is the mother of invention. And as soon as he even had created it and published it, he already knew, like, man, I screwed some of this stuff up. Like, there's some stuff that I would definitely do differently. And it's really interesting to hear him talk about it. But, he just had to get stuff done in a compressed amount of time. He didn't really have time to overthink it. Even with the new ECMA 6, I feel like, which is going to be drastically different from 5 and borrow a lot of kind of Ruby-esque conventions with classes and such. I think it'll be much more user-friendly. If you're really into Ruby, I think that'll translate very well to ECMAScript 6. All right, so let's start actually doing a little bit of code here. Have you guys played around with the donut, like the GA donut API? So this is a cool little feature. I forget who created it, but I use this on several exercises and such. But someone very smart at GA created an API of donuts that we can use to sample out doing GET requests, posts, things like that. The handy thing lives here at this link. You can actually click on the donuts.ga and it gives you a little bit of information about it. It's pretty cool. Use this a lot to test out. Have you guys used kind of a Chrome extension-y type thing called Postman, where you can do HTTP requests? Yeah, it's a pretty cool feature, pretty cool app. Use that a lot to hit this API to test stuff out. So if you guys want to clone this repo, we have some starter code that'll get us started. We're going to be doing a lot of this in the console anyway, but we do want to grab the index.html page so that we have something to render. So if you guys want to go ahead and clone that, I'll give you a second to do that. And then if you want to go into the starter code folder and open up the index.html, and it should look like this right here. It doesn't do anything yet, but it's going to load in jQuery for us, and we're going to have a DOM that we can play around with. So it's a nice little starter code. Give you guys just a second for that. So the cool thing, as it says here in the README, the great thing about this app is that it already kind of scaffolds out a little bit of an input box here. I have a drop down, which is really handy. So it gives us some cool stuff to play with if we want to build this out later. Yeah, let me know if I can help anyone. So is anyone still cloning? Good. Okay. Well, let's move forward here. Similar to what we did yesterday, let's take a look at what an AJAX request looks like in vanilla JavaScript, just so we know what's going on under the hood. I think it'll really make us appreciate jQuery for sure and the conciseness of it. So this says, you may want to write out this code in Sublime first and then copy it into the console. We're just going to copy this into the console, but let's walk through this and see if we can just get a little bit of a sense of what this code is going to do for us. So does someone want to maybe take a stab at these first 2 lines? We'll just walk through this and see if we can kind of figure out what's going on here. So what's happening here on line 1?
We're defining a variable which is equal to the HTTP request.
Yeah. So the HTTP, XML HTTP request, that's something that all browsers recognize. So it's a JavaScripty way to make basic HTTP requests, but it's something that's cross-browser. So it's kind of like creating it's kind of like a constructor function actually. And so we're creating a new request and assigning it to the variable called request, and then we can attach different methods and such to it. Cool. So we're assigning that to our variable request. What about line 2? What would you guys guess is happening there?
So you put the variable that you just defined, dot open, and then the link from the API.
Yep. Yeah, so the open method takes 3 arguments. It can take more, but we're just dealing with 3 here. So that first one, the get, what do you guys think that get represents? What are we telling the request?
That's, I mean, does that, the whole thing just, that just establishes the connection and says we're going to be pulling data from that?
Yeah, exactly. So the get is the type of HTTP verb that we want to use for this request. So that could be a post, it could be put, patch, delete. In this case, we're doing a get request, meaning we want to get this data. The second argument there is the API, the endpoint that we want to hit. Now, what do you guys think about this third argument there, true? Actually, all this information is here as well, but I'll do it. So the true is a Boolean that represents whether or not you want this call to be asynchronous. So in this case, we do want it to be asynchronous, so we're putting the Boolean value true there. So those first 2 lines set up that initial XML HTTP request object. So what about the request.onload? So onload's a method. We're assigning a function to it. What about these request statuses right there? Greater than or equal to 200 and less than 400. So this is kind of setting up our success and our error if else statement here. So have you guys gone to like status cats or anything? Or it has all the status codes and it has like a cat. Look at that really quick. Yeah, so it has all these different images that correspond to the status codes. Created. We don't have to go through all through these. Okay, we can go through all of them. No. Anyway, it's pretty clever. It's pretty cute. But suffice it to say that as long as the request status is equal to or greater than 200, but less than 400, those are good status codes. So those are going to be a successful request. So as long as it falls in those parameters, we're cool. Then we have this var resp, and that's going to be response.text. So we're going to take another look at that. We're going to look at response JSON and see what we're getting back as well. But the var resp is going to be, essentially it's kind of like our data set. That's what that's doing there. And then else, we're just console logging. If there's an error, we'll see that in the console. And this is mainly for server side. And then we have another onError function if the data comes back, but then it breaks on the client side. So we don't need to memorize this. jQuery is going to do all this in like one line, but it's just good to have some idea of what's going on under the hood. And then finally, we have this request.send that actually sends off our request to the API. So let's copy this and see what happens. Just go ahead and copy all this code. Not a big code copy person, but this is, we can definitely move forward from this.
Maybe send it out in Slack with the --
Oh, well, I don't,
that. I'll do it.
yeah. We can just copy this as well, and then let's paste it in. Let's see what happens. So we see that it actually returns our response text, which is an array of our donuts. So basically our data set. So this donut data set, it has 9 donuts. We can also, should have done this earlier, also like to just paste this into to my browser just to check it out as well. So we can do it manually too. But yeah, so when we paste that in, we're actually using vanilla JavaScript to go out, hit that API, and return the data that we requested. So was everyone able to get this? And that's another reason that we wanted to clone this index.html, because we need to do this within the console of this file. If we tried to do it on another page, we would get a CORS error. Do you guys know what a CORS error is, or you guys experienced that? So CORS, there's actually some links at the bottom of the lesson if you want to dig a little deeper. I get these quite frequently, particularly when I'm dealing with APIs, and I imagine you guys will as well. But CORS stands for Cross-Origin Request Forgery. That's essentially what the error is. Long story short, what it means is that it's kind of a protective thing. So the interwebs will not let you grab data if you're requesting that data. So if your server is on one domain and you're requesting from another domain, it'll raise up a flag in case there's any nefarious activity going on. So I would need to be at google.com something in order to hit google.com something servers. That's a very contrived example, but that's essentially what these errors are. So if we pasted this in, this is a little out of scope, but we'll just see this blow up real quick. So if I try to hit that API from here, for example, it shouldn't let me. Yeah, so I get all these errors, right? So I'm on github.com and I'm trying to hit this other API, and there's some permission issues and it's not letting me do it. It will, however, let us do it from this simple little index.html website. If you guys are interested in digging a little bit deeper, there's a couple of links down here that are pretty interesting. It's kind of heady stuff. I still don't understand all of it, but occasionally, particularly in Rails, I'll have to change some configurations to make that API work to play nicely with my data. So you can tuck that away if you want. Cool. So that is the vanilla JavaScript. So this is what's going on under the hood when we use jQuery, our best buddy, to do the same thing. So if we scroll down, let's look at this jQuery get requests. So it's good to have seen the straight old school vanilla JavaScript way of doing it, but we have a lot of libraries and Ruby gems and such to accomplish that same thing. We already have jQuery in our HTML file, so let's try using AJAX jQuery get request and see what that does. So let's go ahead and copy this, or this actually, you could probably type it in if you wanted, but this is going to be the jQuery AJAX way to do it. So if we run that, we get undefined, but that's okay because we have our data assigned to our variable AJAX. So then if we check out AJAX, cool. So now we're getting, what is this actually? What type of object is this? Jesse alluded to it earlier in his coverage. Yeah.
JSON object.
Yeah, so JSON, but more generally a jQuery kind of object, yeah. So that's why this data looks different than what we got when we used the vanilla JavaScript. So this is returning a lot of cool stuff. And what we're really going to be interested in is right down here at the response.json. So this is essentially, if we use HTTP party and such, when we type in that data object, or that's the data is the stuff, the response that we want to get back, what we're really doing is we're digging down into this property of our object. So if we wanted to take a look at this a little bit deeper, how could we do that here? So I've got AJAX, and if I wanted to grab response JSON, how would I do that? If I just wanted to look at that property.
You do dot response JSON. Add that to the end.
Yeah, let's try that. I think that will response JSON. Cool. So when we just grab that property from our object, we get an array of our 9 donuts.
Why are there
Yeah.
not a dozen donuts?
That is a bug. I have put in so many issue requests on that.
Okay.
I don't know. The wheels are really coming off the wagon at Donut headquarters. I'm sure Matt will put our best men on that one and get to the bottom of it.
Because it's from LA.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. They're like vegan, gluten-free, some crap.
It's all surfing. It's all right.
So yeah, so here's a, if we scroll down a little bit in the lesson plan here, so here's a screenshot of what we just looked at essentially. It's kind of hard to see it all in the console window, but we get the object back. And specifically what we're interested in is the data portion, which belongs to the property response JSON. So that's something to note. So anytime we're doing a request, that's really the kernel of what we want to pull out, the data that we want to manipulate. And here we did the ajax.response JSON just to get that object, the array of the 9 donut objects in there. And the other thing to note is that, as it says here, so without refreshing the page, we hit an external API, a totally different URL, and it didn't interrupt our user experience, right? So later on, we're going to grab that JSON data and plug it into the front end, so it'll display for the user, but we're not going to refresh the page. So it's going to be a really nice user experience. Here's another way to write this. Well, any questions so far about the .get jQuery? Here's another example. So jQuery, these AJAX requests, they have several additional methods you can add to them. One of them here is .done. There's also, for example, a .always. There's a there's one more really common one that's escaping me right now, but since this is jQuery, there's several other methods that we can use. So this is an example of using kind of a callback for that asynchronous nature, .done. So the idea is that your code is read, it's going to hit this line of AJAX, it's going to go out to the API, and while that API is pulling, let's say that we're trying to hit some huge database, it's going to take a second to get all that data. As Jesse mentioned this morning, we don't want the user experience, we don't want the page to just freeze. So with that asynchronous nature, our code is going to get read, it's going to go hit this API, and while it's getting the data, it's going to continue to run the rest of the code. When this API is fully loaded and it's done, then we can put some callback information here to return back to the to the DOM, to the end user. So let's just take a quick look at this. This is a pretty small, fast API. We're probably not going to see a lot of speed differentiation here, but just to see how this is done, I'll clear this out, paste that in here. So we're still doing the jQuery GET request, but we're adding this done method. So we want to console log the data when this is done. So let's see this in action. Get undefined. And then we get the array of objects right there. Specifically, this method, so previously when we did, let me do that one more time so we can see it. So previously when we did that GET request, we got that crazy object that we had to dig into with the response JSON. What's happening here? It looks like we're just getting right to the heart of the matter here. We're getting that array that we wanted. So how is this different? What's happening here with this callback versus what we did previously? Because this is what we did the first time. When we run this, we're getting that. Any thoughts? So what's happening between these two calls here? So now when I run the second one, I get the entire object. When I run this one with the callback, I'm getting right down to the meat of it. Why is that? Yeah.
Is it equating data to the response JSON?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. So if you go through the documentation, when you use these callbacks, JavaScript and jQuery is pretty smart to know like the actual data that you're trying to get back. So in this case, when you use the done method, it knows that you're going to feed in the data. And so the data is actually the response JSON property. So yeah, it's just a cool little thing to take note of, is that when you use these callbacks, it knows what you're looking for. It knows that you want like that JSON data set. Yeah, very cool. And notice that it went ahead and gave it to us automatically. Did you guys take note of that? Previously, well, let's see it one more time. So with this one, the first one, we run it, we get undefined. It doesn't call back anything, right? We have to use our variable AJAX to actually get the object. When we use that second call, this one that uses the done method, it goes ahead and returns that data object to us. So it returned undefined, but this callback console logged the data. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do in here. So again, just a little bit of a demonstration of that asynchronous nature and kind of the power of using jQuery to hit your APIs and such. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Why do you have to hit it twice? Because the first time it says undefined, and you hit it again, it brings up.
Yeah, so kind of goes back to what we did yesterday. So 9 times out of 10, when you do a JavaScript, when you write a JavaScript function, it's going to return undefined. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. But JavaScript, unlike Ruby, you have to explicitly tell it to return something. So remember yesterday with the ATM, we put return amount or return this or that. So you'd have to tell your function to return something specifically. And if we don't do that, it's just going to return undefined. The variable worked. I mean, the call worked. If we type in AJAX, everything worked successfully. But it didn't return anything. We may have mentioned this yesterday before the Ruby Rails people. What do Ruby methods return? Just by the nature of the Ruby language.
No hashes.
Huh?
Hashes.
Well, depending on what you ask for, sure. But if JavaScript functions inherently, you have to tell them to return something explicitly. What do Ruby methods generally, what do they return?
The last function that was
Yeah.
just makes it like out to you.
So Ruby you don't have to put return. Ruby inherently returns the last thing evaluated in Ruby methods, which is kind of cool. In Ruby, you don't need callbacks. You don't use callbacks in Ruby necessarily. It's just a little bit of difference between how Ruby handles things and JavaScript handles things. So we would have to explicitly say return something for this function to automatically return. That's kind of what we're doing here with the done. You know, if you want to be a little fancy about it, it's kind of like a return. It's a callback, but it's saying after you go and get my API data, then do this. This is what I want you to return to me. And in this case, we're just console logging the data set. Okay, so yeah, so here are a couple of other really common callback methods: done, fail, and always. So if you want to check the documentation for those, they're kind of self-explanatory. You know, fail is kind of an error handling type method. But those are some really common ones. So let's do a little bit of independent practice before we hop into the other exercise. So using the console, try hitting a few more API endpoints. So there's 4 bullet points here. So number 1, try to get a single donut and just spit out the JSON data in the console. So that's very similar to the first thing we did when we hit the API. Number 2, try to use the more generic AJAX to do the same request. So if you want to click on this AJAX, it'll take you to documentation. So there's a subtle difference between, we can use $AJAX. So this jQuery method is a little more verbose, but it's a little more flexible. With this one, we can pass in get, we can pass in post, we can pass in some more customization parameters. Or compare that to when we did the get request. Get, we just put in the URL, we were good to go, we're off and running, because it already knows that we're trying to get that information. But play around with that AJAX, because occasionally we will need to use the more generic AJAX method, so for more customization in here. So check that out. Then modify that donut by changing its flavor. So that donut that you chose, see if you can change the flavor property. And then try to add a new donut to the list with a style and a flavor property. So just see if you can add something to it. If you get stuck, give it the college try and such, but there's some solution code here, and we'll walk through it, give you guys like 15, 20 minutes. But if you get stuck and you're really in a pickle, here's some solution code for you. So yeah, and then do you guys usually break at like 2 little break, or how do you guys usually?
Between 15 minutes and an hour.
Okay. So why don't we do that? Why don't you guys, let's reconvene at 2:10. So go ahead and work on this. If you want to take a little break, feel free to do that, and we'll review this around 2:10ish. Does anyone have any questions, or I'll be walking around if you guys need any help with anything too.
across through that shop.
I want to know why Katie Curtis is there.
Yeah.
I don't know why Katie Couric was like Tina Fey. She's phenomenal. Who's that? Katie Couric used to be Good Morning America, right? Something like that. Like today's show, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She had a sweet job, man. Smile every morning. Don't pay the back nothing. Huh? You get paid a lot. You get paid, huh? Good.